hear from the anonymous whistleblower.
Now, there is one witness that they won't bring in front of us. They won't bring in front of the American people. And that's the guy who started it all.
I'd be glad to have the person who started it all come in and testify. President Trump is welcome to take a seat right there.
So Nancy Cordes is joining us now from Capitol Hill, along with CBS News White House correspondent Paula Reed and Bob Litt. He is a former U.S. Deputy Assistant Attorney General, and he's joining us from Washington. So we're going to start with you, Nancy. We heard in your piece about the new information from Taylor's testimony regarding what a staffer told him about a phone call between President Trump and U.S. Ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland. What's the significance of this information? Because after all, Taylor wasn't there, so he's learning this information from a staff member who told him about it later. So this is brand new information.
It is brand new information, and while it is something that Taylor himself did not hear, what Democrats say is that it is yet another example of the president's intent. One of the arguments that Republicans have made is that a lot of this evidence is circumstantial. People who thought that they knew what the president wanted instead of, the word coming from the horse's mouth. In this case, they say there was a well-respected staffer at the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine who says he overheard the president himself saying, hey, what's the deal with these investigations? Democrats argue there's other evidence that comes straight from the president as well. They point to the president's phone call where he asked the Ukrainian president point blank to look into the Bidens. And they say there's his acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, who stood at the White House podium and said that they do this all the time. And while he rejected the notion that it was because of the Bidens, he did say that there were certain things that the president wanted in order for this aid to be released. So Democrats say it's another piece of the puzzle. They're bringing this individual, David Holmes, in to testify behind closed doors tomorrow. We haven't gotten any word whether they're going to have him testify publicly as well, but Republicans are sure to say that this is somebody who says they heard something, finally relaying it several months later, and they're likely to discount the information.
Paula, the president yesterday said he was, quote, too busy to watch the hearing, but his Twitter activity during the hearing yesterday suggests something different. Look, if you're in an echo chamber, you heard what you wanted to hear yesterday, and the president's Twitter feed this morning suggests, as he's retweeting folks like Jim Jordan, that they think they scored a win. Democrats think that they scored a win. So what are you hearing from your sources in the White House about what they saw yesterday and what they anticipate in the days ahead?
That's right. Even though the president said he wasn't watching, that didn't stop him from weighing in. In fact, even though he said he didn't actually have eyes on a TV screen, he was weighing in and criticizing the format of the questioning, in addition to tweeting over 30 times. But as you noted, a lot of those were retweets of people who believe that he has been wronged here, his allies, and some of the White House Twitter accounts that were pushing out his message, which is that he is going to continue to fight, and Democrats are trying to stop him and prevent him from fighting for the folks who sent him here to the White House. Now, he also had some help in pushing out his message yesterday. The press secretary, pretty reclusive, Stephanie Grisham, she was on Twitter pumping out the message. They were also pushing out talking points. Yesterday was the kind of coordinated messaging approach that we would have expected to see over the past few weeks. But really, we saw it for the first time in full effect yesterday. And most of the sources I've spoken with here in terms of the hearing, they say somewhat sarcastically, it was even more boring than they imagined. And they don't believe that in the long run, this hearing or any of the hearings coming up are truly going to damage the president's standing. Clearly, no one wants impeachment, but they do not believe the president will be removed from office. But they clearly are concerned enough to at least put out a coordinating messaging effort, which in this White House, I will tell you, is pretty rare.
So, Bob, what we heard from many of the Republicans in terms of their criticism of the testimony from the two witnesses is that it was based on secondhand information or hearsay. So anyone who's watched legal dramas will hear, objection, hearsay, sir. But can you talk to us? It's sort of a two-part question. What exactly is hearsay? Did you hear hearsay from these witnesses, because they were testifying to what they observed and also the perception of what they observed, what they believe was sort of the underlying message being sent out. So was that hearsay, or was some of it hearsay, and was some of it not? And is hearsay something that you just automatically throw out?
Well, it depends upon whether you're talking about the context of a trial in a court or whether you're talking about the kinds of things that you use to make decisions in your ordinary life. There is a rule that says hearsay, which is an out-of-court statement by someone who's not testifying, is generally not admissible in a trial, although there are lots of exceptions to that. And I frankly haven't thought through the extent to which any of those exceptions might apply. But that doesn't mean that in your ordinary life, hearsay can't be very reliable. And what you have here is a very consistent pattern that's entirely consistent with what the president said in his conversation with President Zelensky, with what, as Nancy noted, Acting Chief of Staff Mulvaney said, and which all fits together into a pattern that suggests that what these people are hearing is in fact accurate and reliable.
Nancy, let me ask you about David Holmes. Now, he is the staffer who provided those explosive details of Gordon Sondland's call with the president to Taylor. He is scheduled to testify behind closed doors tomorrow. Meanwhile, Sondland will testify at an open hearing next week. It does feel, we were saying this yesterday as we were watching these hearings, Nancy, that Gordon Sondland is in for what I expect to be sort of a brutal hearing from both sides of the aisle. How crucial will his testimony, and I guess Holmes as well, although to the question as to, what he heard and what he thought he heard, there's a lot you can play around there. But Gordon Sondland seems to be a linchpin here.
He is, and he's a bit of a wild card. For a lot of these witnesses who are testifying publicly, we essentially already know what they're going to say because we saw the transcripts of their private depositions. In Sondland's case, it's kind of an open question because, as you recall, he testified initially saying that he didn't know anything about a quid pro quo. He wasn't aware of it till the very end. But then he came back and submitted this 3-page addendum that said, oh yes, now my memory has been jogged by the opening statements of all the other witnesses. And actually, I did know about a quid pro quo, and I'm the one who delivered that message to the Ukrainians, telling them that they were going to need to open these investigations if they wanted the president to release military aid. What that enabled him to do, though, was get away without answering any questions about who told him to deliver that quid pro quo. Was it the president himself? Did the message come through the president's acting chief of staff? Was he freelancing? Was he just interpreting what the president wanted? Those are the kinds of questions that Democrats and Republicans alike are going to be asking him. And it could be very revealing in getting back to this question of personal firsthand knowledge. If Sondland testifies that it was indeed one of those many phone calls he apparently had with the president in which the president said, hey, tell them that I need them to open an investigation into Joe Biden before I'm going to release this aid, then, that is certainly a pretty powerful piece of firsthand knowledge.
So, Bob, lawyers for both parties led the first round of questioning yesterday, and then lawmakers sort of followed up afterwards. How did the questioning differ between lawmakers and lawyers, and what are the benefits of using counsel to start off these sort of hearings?
I think there are two benefits. One of them comes not from using counsel, but from the fact that the initial round of questioning was 45 minutes long. The standard questioning by members of Congress at a hearing is 5 minutes, and as we have seen many times, 5 minutes is not enough to get any kind of coherent questioning out. Particularly when, and this is my other point, the members of Congress are frequently more interested in making a speech than in actually asking questions of the witness. The lawyers who did the questioning were not looking to get on local television, looking to advance their own electoral prospects, and so they did a much calmer, more organized, and more focused set of questioning that actually was able to carry a story through, as opposed to the very short, argumentative back and forth from members of Congress.
So listen, Paula, the president has been teasing that there was another phone call and he was going to release the transcript. This is a phone call to the president of Ukraine. And as my understanding is that it's a phone call that happened before the July 25th phone call. Any news on what the contents of that call might be and when that transcript will be released? And will we get the full transcript?
Well, it's our understanding that this was a call back in April, mostly a congratulatory call following the election, and the president insists that it's perfect. And he believes, and some folks in the White House believe, that if they put this out, it will help establish a pattern of completely appropriate communication between the president and the leader of Ukraine. Yesterday, the president suggested he may release that today, but I have to remind you, over the weekend, he said he would release it on Tuesday. It's not clear if this transcript will actually come out, because other officials in the White House point to the fact that this is probably not actually going to help the president's case. Just because you have a fine conversation in April, that does not undermine this mounting evidence of an apparent alleged conspiracy to pressure a foreign government to investigate a political rival. Just because you said congratulations and nothing else in April to a foreign leader does not mean you didn't have a conversation with Gordon Sondland about possible investigations by Ukraine into your political rivals. It may not help the president's case as much as he would like, which is why I'm skeptical about whether the White House will actually release this, because it doesn't seem like it would make much news or really move the ball for the president at all.
Yeah, it's a good point. And Nancy, to the point that Paula was making, the president, it's interesting as you watch folks like Jim Jordan go after the two individuals testifying yesterday and what he was focusing on, and then you listen to the president and you read the president's tweets. The president keeps saying, perfect phone call. I didn't hear one Republican yesterday talk about how perfect that phone call was. No one have I've seen in the last couple of days coming out and using that defense, even though the president, that's the message he keeps sending, which is that it was a perfect phone call. And so I wonder if there is still that disconnect. Are you hearing from Republican lawmakers that there is still a disconnect as they go out there and defend the president? All right, let's take you now to the Hill, where Lindsey Graham is speaking to reporters about the first hearing in the impeachment inquiry.
You did something wrong, do a whistleblower complaint, but you can't find out who they are, and all the accusations against you are based on hearsay. This is a dangerous precedent set for the country. Thanks.
So would you introduce a quick motion to...
Barr is denying that the White House ever asked him to clear the president of wrongdoing regarding that phone call with Ukraine's leader at an event on the Justice Department's crackdown on gun violence yesterday. The Attorney General says he doesn't remember receiving that request from the president.
It's the first time Barr addressed reports the president asked him to hold a news conference clearing his name of any wrongdoing on that phone call with Ukrainian President Zelensky. President Trump has suffered another major loss in the legal fight over his tax returns. A U.S. appeals court ruled that it would not revisit an earlier decision by a three-judge panel allowing a congressional subpoena for the returns.
The decision paves the way for Congress to seek 8 years' worth of documents on President Trump's finances. His lawyers say they will appeal the decision and take this legal battle all the way to the Supreme Court. The Department of Homeland Security has a new chief today. Chad Wolf has officially been sworn in as acting secretary. He takes over from former boss Kevin McAnealon, who stepped down last month.
The department hasn't had a permanent leader since April when Kirstjen Nielsen resigned. Wolf is the fifth person to lead DHS. He'll next...
Democrats and Republicans remain divided over whether to impeach President Trump. As you can imagine, it's not breaking news. Congressman Adam Schiff and his fellow Democrats claim the evidence proves President Trump and his allies made choices based on political gain and risk national security.
However, Republicans, including Congressman Jim Jordan, are standing by the president. He says the July phone call summary between President Trump and Ukraine's leader offers zero proof of pressuring Ukraine to carry out politically motivated investigations. So let us bring in Leslie Sanchez and Antoine Seawright. Leslie is a CBS News political contributor and a Republican strategist, and Antoine is also a CBS and political contributor and a Democratic strategist. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. All right, Antoine, I'm going to start with you. Did the Democrats do what they set out to do, which is begin to build an argument towards articles of impeachment suggesting that the president abused his power?
Yeah, so I think the strategy for Democrats yesterday was to set framework or foundation for how to proceed going forward. I told one of my dear friends in leadership that please don't try to run trick plays, block and tackle, and try to run the ball straight down the field so that it's a pull game plan. I think they did that. Look, there was no need to get all high from an emotional standpoint, but deal with the facts. And when we make the case on the facts, I think we do ourselves a positioning service of making the case to the American people who may not be paying attention at the level Leslie and I are paying attention at.
Well, so let me ask you a question, because sort of the challenge of building that case slowly is that, yep, you're building an argument towards articles of impeachment, but also the country's watching. And sometimes a slow, steady argument is actually not that interesting. We're asking a lot of the American people to keep on tuning into these things.
Well, here's what I believe. If someone continues to punch me in my face, like slowly and surely, instead of just knocking me out, I feel the pain a little more versus just a total TKO. And I think that was maybe the strategy behind how the Democrats laid it out. You cannot discredit two decorated government officials who have worked for Democratic and Republican administrations who made it clear their job is to come in and share the truth, not get into whether what's right or wrong, what's impeachable or not, but to simply lay the facts. I think they were smart in having the lawyers do most of the questioning instead of the politicians who may be trying to have a Twitter moment.
Yeah, you know, speaking of that Twitter moment, Leslie, I saw a tweet from John Ratcliffe, a congressman who did do some of the questioning yesterday. The president retweeted him, and the tweet was, you know, I'm paraphrasing, something along the lines of, you know, I asked these two gentlemen if what they witnessed, what they believed they witnessed was impeachable, and there was no response. Well, to the point that Antoine, I guess, is making, is they very clearly oftentimes said to both Democrats and Republicans, we're not here to decide whether to impeach the president. That is your constitutional responsibility. Right. So in that regard, do you think that Republicans made the case as to why what is being reported and what these gentlemen and others have said does not rise to the level of an impeachable offense?
I don't think it's just the members of Congress. I think that the American public is there. I mean, if you think about overwhelmingly, they do not see this as an impeachable offense, and I don't think the Democrats did anything that moved the needle with respect to that. They can say they were building a foundation, but they built it on sand. It's consistently shifty. There's not strong foundational support, nor an appetite for what you saw. And it's the question, like, was the call like poor judgment? Was it the president's cadence? Did he, you know, there's so much gray area in that. So that's the first question that needs to be answered. The second question, is it an impeachable offense? The Democrats are going to argue regardless of what the evidence is. That's what the Republican pushback's always been. They already made a determination before they heard the testimony. And that's why I think you have so many people turned off or already calcified in their positions.
Well, make no mistake, Democrats are already going to go to their corner. Republicans the same thing. No one can argue that from the beginning of this process, Republicans did a great job of trying to taint the process, of trying to, I think, put water on the facts and pour water on the process. So you had that. But also, I think Castro made the most important point out of any member who questioned yesterday when he said, setting a precedent going forward, are Republicans going to say it's okay for a Democrat or Republican in future examples or elections to ask a foreign entity to dig up dirt on their political opponent? Now, Leslie, you may argue that's not what the president did, but Democrats and Republicans have argued that he did. So the question is whether they embrace it, whether it's right or wrong. We went from no quid pro quo to, oh, that's not an impeachable offense.
It's not quid pro quo. And the president, look at the president this way. And the Democrats want to say that's what it is. And people don't buy that. They can keep selling their wares, but the American public's not buying that. The second part is, I'm not agreeing with the way the president's style, but think about the convention when he's like, you know, if you have the emails, you know, come forward. The president has just an unorthodox is a very nice euphemism for his approach in governance and his approach in kind of outlining either corruption or digging up dirt on his political foes. I think the way this appears, where he's doing it, and now it looks like it's under the rubric of the 2016, but really the 2020 election, is the problematic side of this. And the president, and I don't think the Republicans have answered that, but on the merits of what we're talking about, it doesn't stand to the level of impeachment.
You know, the Republicans are sort of arguing that these two gentlemen, as dedicated public servants as they have been, they didn't talk to Giuliani, they didn't talk to the president. They're basically interpreting what other people have said about what the policy may or may not have been. And so, you know, I heard that argument, and, you know, I'm keeping in mind that the idea is to also influence the American people, right, win them over. But then I think, you know, moving forward, I don't know what the Republicans are going to do. Moving forward, we're going to have the staff member, Ambassador Taylor staff member, who kind of overheard that conversation. We're going to have Ambassador to the European Union, Sondland.
And then you'll have Lieutenant Colonel Vindman sitting there in his dress blue uniforms with his Purple Heart testifying before members of Congress as they try to tear down what he heard. He was on that call.
It's going to be harder for the Republicans to just dismiss the witnesses that we're going to be hearing from in the very near future.
Right. There wasn't an effort to dismiss the testimony from yesterday. I mean, people say career State Department. You know, there's a lot of people that interpret the State Department as having kind of a certain way, a foreign policy that's been done historically and a certain type of sympathetic approach. You know, we talked about that. We heard about that. You know, he cringed cringe is my word, but you know, when these kind of relationships, it's breaking down kind of these political relationships that they were most concerned about. But the president doesn't fit in that box in the way that he addresses new leaders as a new president and learning his new style. So that gray area is what I keep coming back to, because people say part of it is they want the president to go in there and, you know, look for corruption, address these things. There's a lot to that, whether or not it moves forward, to your point, next week when you hear people that were in the room. But I think that's still going to be extremely difficult.
Can I just add before, Antoine, so why would the Republicans, to bolster that argument, why not just say, look, as the president keeps saying, the president did nothing wrong, perfect phone call, let Mick Mulvaney testify. Let Pompeo get on the stand. Why not put the folks that were on, instead of saying, look, it's all hearsay, the Congress has asked for these individuals to turn up. Why not put them on there? They can say that it was perfect, there was nothing wrong, President didn't ask for a quid pro quo, and we all go home.
Nobody, that's, in fantasy land, I think that would be, you know, we would love that. We would love that scenario. Let's just bring out anybody that the Democrats want, because it's a political circus, is what they would say. So they are controlling the strings and trying to manipulate the White House to put individuals on the stand for what the president believes is a hoax and kind of a made-up political agenda, as opposed to getting to the truth. He says we've disclosed the truth. I've disclosed the transcripts. I'm saying from the perspective of Republicans, there's not a fair playing field. And I think that's, and Antoine and I will agree, I think, on that part, is that's why no one's buying it. That's why people look at this and say it's a politically motivated set of hearings. It's not a third party or Department of Justice like in previous impeachments. It's not a special counsel who comes with mountains of evidence. It's a politically motivated Democratic House Intelligence Committee, and that's the...
So this is what I was thinking. I was thinking that, you know, the likelihood of the Senate voting to remove the president is pretty low, right? I think we can sort of accept that. Yeah, well, it's true. You know, I don't know how the argument's going to go forward, right? But we're asking the American people to focus on this long, drawn-out argument. Why not just start with some bombshell stuff instead of this slowly plotting?
Well, because from a strategic standpoint, which I do for a living, you have to build the case and bring your best evidence at the end to close the case. But let's back up for a second. Say what you want about career diplomats who've pledged an oath to do right by our government, Democratic and Republican administration. You would be one of them because you worked in the United States government. These people don't care about the politics, believe it or not. Now, unfortunately, the president has brought this idea that they are against him because they want to get to the truth. We have to get away from that. That's where we have to step back and say, no, you know what? It may be bad. And what's so frustrating is that I've heard several Republican senators say on the record the call was problematic. It was wrong. Now, whether they think it's impeachable, that's a different story. And the fact is, no one can dispute that the president's chief of staff on tape, in my community we say we have the receipts, Vlad, that says that he withheld funding for the Ukraine government, and we've heard testimony after testimony back it up. It's because the president wanted them to dig up dirt on their political opponent. You can say what you want about the politics of the moment, and we can give Trump a pass because he's not conventional, but at the end of the day, that's wrong, and I think that's where it's going to be a problem for Mulvaney and others going down this road. Now, the thing that Democrats did not flush out, and which they should have, is Giuliani's shadow role as Secretary of State.
Oh my God.
That's going to be problematic going forward. I feel like
this is like a telenovela. Like, let's just add all the characters in and, like, you know, add some false eyelashes and we're all there.
Isn't that becoming a challenge for the Republicans, though? Because it really does seem like the defense is all over the place, and that's what it felt like yesterday.
It's the kitchen sink approach. I mean, because part of the argument...
But follow that?
That's the question. I think that's the most astute point you've made, and that needs to be heard over and over again is we are not in a media environment where it is collective conscience. We're all watching together and we're all deciding based on 3 networks, you know, how this goes. And we're here at one of them, but you know, historically it has changed and people are getting their information based on their friends, their influencers that are local, and the Facebook effect. And that is changing because they're just getting a quick bite about it. And the people that are advocates that are watching every single minute have already determined where they fall in terms of, you know, implications or not.
Until somebody goes to jail.
Right. Oh no, a lot of people go to jail. A lot of people are going to jail.
Until somebody goes to jail as a result of this.
Point out that the argument is being built now. When I said the likelihood of the Senate voting to remove is we don't know what's going to come up.
That's slim to none. But until we see,
isn't that the point? The point of bringing the country through this experience is because they felt it had the merits of impeachment. So part of it is this a political exercise in democracy that the Democrats feel they have to exercise, knowing that the Senate is going to see this differently.
Leslie, can I ask you one respectful question?
Yes.
Do you think Democrats could just press the ignore button with all of the information they have in the case they're presenting? Do you think they can just, from the idea of doing their sole duty and responsibility, do you think they can just say, oh, well, it's bad, but we just can't do anything with it?
Okay, if I were advising the Democrats, I would have said,
come on, Democratic strategists.
There you go. You know, the handy, I'll send you the bill. But the handy part of this, I would have taken all the political grandstanding out of it, and that's just almost impossible, even on the Republican side, if roles were reversed. I would have let the counselors ask their questions and remove to the highest extent this political circus that we're in right now. Because then as soon as they hear all of the leadership and all of the Democrats going on their traditional talking points, it turns everybody off. Everybody goes to their corner and the game is over. And that's what they miss. That's what they miss. So
this is such a fascinating.
But can I just say one more thing, Vlad?
Okay, real quick.
You can, but we're all going to get fired with the producers.
If politicians didn't say anything yesterday, Castro's point would have never been put into the atmosphere.
Castro's point was extreme, and I like Castro.
It was important.
Texas, a neighbor, but
it was important. We can't just allow
holistically. It's important, but I don't think it's in the context of this.
This is a good discussion.
Very good discussion.
Antoine Seawright, Leslie Sanchez, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So public testimony will continue tomorrow.